with us through the chat window. Sunil, please continue.
Hey, thank you, Rick. Thank you, and thank you for joining this webinar. We are going to today talk about key performance indicators for asset management. As it indicates, we will be talking, there is an overlapping between asset performance management, and I'm going to try to focus more on the key performance indicators that can be useful for maintenance and reliability initiatives. So before we start, I would like to take a polling question. Rick, please.
Sure. What CMMS EM software do you use? SAP, Maximo, DataStream, Oracle, or any other? Okay, so we are done. Around 47% use Maximo, 13% use SAP, whereas 13% use DataStream, and 37% use other CMMS softwares.
All right. So seems like majority of them are Maximo, SAP, or DataStream. So it always helps the companies which have formally implemented a system always have an advantage in this in building key performance indicators that will help manage their maintenance and reliability functions. So in general,
your screen is not visible, your presentation skills. Yeah.
Yeah. So in general, we have seen that there are multiple challenges in a large organization. There are multiple roles people play, and all these assets have a purpose, and they all are there in the first place to deliver some service or production or in case of manufacturing. So there is a set expectations from all the functions that assets are supposed to be doing. So if I'm a plant executive, I'm looking for ensuring plant level uptime, quality of throughput, and overall the productivity that we expect out of all the plant assets. If I'm maintenance manager or supervisor, I want to ensure that all my people do what we are supposed to be doing, and how do I align maintenance goals with the strategic objectives of the business. Planning, scheduling, they have their own. So each one of these roles have their own desired results from the work, the activities that they perform, and somehow we have to see how that can be tied back to the key performance indicators, so there is a way to measure and monitor the performance. Also, in many cases, there will be some constraints that may impact some other functions, and in that case, those can be also treated as part of performance indicators. So generally, just before we get into the details, the asset management has a direct impact on overall financial and operational performance of the organization. So obviously everybody wants to see reduced maintenance spend. At the same time, they want to by ensuring that the maintenance resources are deployed optimally. Most companies would like to increase output or capacity based on the asset base that they already have. So equipment availability and utilization is a key indicator. And obviously working capital, whether it's spare parts or any other services that you might engage, you want to improve the overall reduce the overall working capital so that you get the same amount of results. And in general, there are other risks that everybody like to mitigate in terms of environment, safety, health, and in case of some other industries, federal or compliance related risks. So what we would like to do is, what we have seen in most organizations, somehow asset performance directly and indirectly kind of can be put into these 5 different areas. And depending on your company profile, it may change, but generally we have seen you want to increase the productivity, want to have good financials, whether it's in terms of maintenance spend or overall production or the revenue that they may be tracking, and the profitability of the company. Of course, the risk related to compliance, FDA, EHS, depending on the industry. And we have also seen some underperforming assets can have a impact on the quality of the production or the quality of the service that is provided to the other departments within the organization. And the last and the most important thing is probably the maturity of the workforce that is engaged in managing these assets. So it's an ongoing, evolving process where people can kind of train all the resources or all the people that are involved in directly and indirectly in asset management. So we have seen these are kind of a broad 5 areas, and obviously this doesn't directly talk about the actual maintenance management function, but the KPIs can in turn impact these type of outputs. So before I go further, Rick, can you have the second question, please?
Sure. Which reporting tool do you currently use? BERT, BO Crystal, Cognos, Microsoft, or any other? All right, we have the polls here. 30% use Microsoft, 25% use BERT, 15% use Cognos, and 25% use other reporting tools.
Okay. All right. So most of them use some sort of more formal reporting tool. In many cases, people use Excel or use something else, so it has its own set of challenges. So it's always helpful to have a good tool that can help in providing that type of reporting. So while we were talking about the impact of maintenance activities, obviously it's all related to cost efficiencies, and there is a direct relationship between activities and the results. And on one hand, in this example, we are looking at the cost and resources, productivity. So as you can see, there is a maintenance management activities, or all the activities related to maintenance management, how it impacts the overall company's management aspects, and then how it in turn impacts the shareholders and the board or the stakeholders' objectives. So again, somehow we got to relate it, so some KPIs and some performance indicators can actually reflect the end or the lagging results. So same thing here, but just more focusing on the maintenance side of it. If you really look at the maintenance, how it is impacting the cost or labor utilization or the productivity, availability of the assets. And this is when you put it into a map like this, it kind of helps you crystallize what KPIs might be more important, and we'll discuss this more as we go along. In most of the CMMS systems, we are using some sort of, we collect a lot of data over a period of time, and I think that data can be leveraged to get a holistic view of various functions in the maintenance field, whether it is PM or work management, planning, scheduling, or spare parts management, or failure analysis, reliability, whatever the areas might be, it kind of, you can take all these different KPIs and kind of get a bigger picture of it and also try to see and investigate a problem. Many times these KPIs can help in terms of another data along with it. It's not just one KPI or few KPIs, but along with other data sources and other data can help build EM strategies. And once you decide on a strategy and execute on that, you also want to ensure that the execution itself is done in a right way, and you are not deviating from your execution plan. And then, of course, you would like to manage the outcome. So KPIs can help in all these different areas. And while the strategy itself can be actually built to align the maintenance goals with the business goals. Also, there are process improvements. We all do continuous process improvement, and part of that process improvement is to identify the bottlenecks, identify areas of improvement, and some of the KPIs can be designed towards that. And then, of course, some will be leading and some will be lagging, and you want to ensure that the leading indicators give you early warning, early signals, so that you can take corrective action to impact the to lessen the impact on the lagging indicators if there are any problems. Sometimes these KPIs will also be useful to compare results between two plants of the same company, or in some cases you may do it departmental wise, depending on whatever makes sense, if it's an apples to apples comparison. And in most cases, these benchmarking is used in terms of highlighting the best practices which one can use from or learn from another department or another plant or another site. In some cases, in multinational cases, it can be another country or continent, and see what are the learnings one can do. There is a lot of impact on the cultural side of the equation on these KPIs, but having that some sort of way to compare always helps. Another important aspect of this is communicating goals. When you have a large organization and you want to have involvement of the people on the field and want them to participate in the overall objectives of the company, then KPIs can be a great tool, or can be used as a great tool and a motivational tool for the people at the plant or at the shop floor level, or at different levels in the organization. So we have seen that a clearly and well-defined KPI can actually communicate exactly what you expect out of them. And that is where the art and science is of designing a good KPI. Also, when there is a performance gaps, when maybe the outliers or there's a degradation or some behavior is impacting, then I think it will help the performance indicators will help monitor how the organization is performing and executing on the strategy. Overall, it will also help in decision-making process. The quality of the decisions can be improved, and more importantly, the decision can be done in a timely manner. If you trend some of these KPIs, you can also see how you have improved your performance. So typically, if you see a trend and can justify the investments you make on any of these new initiatives, so you have a new RCM or new PDM or condition-based monitoring initiative, and somehow you show that before the initiative this was the result, and then after the initiative whether you are seeing the change in the performance or not. So some of these things can have a direct impact on the investments that you make in different maintenance management initiatives. Recent survey was done, and there were many other questions, but the important question in this context was, what do you think is the biggest challenge for the company to in terms of how you use your data, etc. And a lot of times these are the basic and why people struggle with building good KPIs to drive their business, and part of that is disparate systems, data is incomplete or has quality issues, and don't get timely information, people are busy. So there are many questions, and then this was the result. But the net is companies struggle in getting this information from various systems, and they are not able to provide that at different levels in the organization. So if you further analyze it, it's more due to the lack of knowledge on how data can be leveraged. In some cases, these type of projects are led by IT, and IT may not really understand the maintenance and the reliability functional areas. So they will do exactly what is being asked to do, but when you define the specifications, etc., there could be gaps. Sometimes the systems, CMMS system itself is not mature. It's not used to the extent it can be, and so the data quality is also a challenge with that, and the way the processes are defined in the CMMS may not lend itself to do good KPIs. The other big issue is poor data quality, as discussed, whether it's accuracy, consistency, and completeness of these of the data that is collected within CMMS or other data sources, and hence the analysis is not trustworthy, or just there is no comfort feeling that the KPIs that are defined are really good KPIs. But we have seen that it is an evolving process. You start maybe with a bad data, with a bad output, but as you start looking at it over a period of time, you have a way to, you can do a continuous quality improvement and kind of improve the results that you get out of these KPIs. Other things we have seen is the taxonomy and standardization of measurements. A lot of times KPIs are defined, but they may mean something else to a particular group than the other group. And if there is no formal process of defining these or standardizing these measurements, then it is always subject to interpretation and misinterpretation. So having good taxonomy, good standardization process can always help in defining and using these KPIs. We have seen sometimes other priorities take precedence, and companies don't invest time and energy into building good KPIs. Of course, budget is a constraint in today's economy. And the other two areas I think are more overriding to all these other areas is culture of not making data-driven decisions. So many times it's all about guts, all about experience, all about familiarity of the environment, and people just set in their ways and they make the judgment decision. But data analysis and related KPIs can really assist the experienced people in reinforcing whatever the decisions that they make and the way they perform their day-to-day operation. The leadership really has to insist, and if it is not, leadership lacks that initiative, then then the KPIs are not really followed through, or it's kind of flavor of the day, and it's just not used to the extent that it can be used. We have seen many organizations move towards, as the leadership insists, over a period of time, that process of improving data quality really enhances drastically if leadership is involved. So before I go, Rick, can I have the third question?
Yeah, sure. Rate the quality of your data within CMMS in terms of accuracy, consistency, and completeness. Sorry, there's a different question. Do you have a formal company-wide asset performance management initiative? Yeah. 62% say no and 38% say yes, they have some initiatives for APM.
Okay. Okay, that helps actually. When you have a formal, and the reason it's important is when you have a formal, then there is a structure and there is a kind of thought process that goes behind this definition of the KPIs, etc. So it can be a lot more effective when you have a little formal process and involvement with the other people. But in general, the goals achievement model, and this is classic, it's across many management books, is every organization will have some vision, or maintenance department will have some vision, or the reliability department will have, or even at a crew level or at a supervisor level, they can have their own vision or the objectives that they can define, and based on that there could be you can split that into different goals, and for each goal to achieve those goals you can have multiple initiatives, maybe 2, 3, depending on what you are trying to do. If you are increasing your reliability is your goal, then maybe you will have RCM, CBM, maybe you will do TPM, or whatever the initiatives might be. And for each one of those initiatives, you will have different types of activities. Now, each of these activities in turn can have two things. One is the outcome that those activities produce. So those are the results of those, or outcomes of all these activities. And then obviously the other would be is how well you are performing those activities. So so that's the monitoring of the execution and then monitoring of the outcomes itself. So most of the time the KPIs can be designed to actually look at these two aspects, is how well you are performing the activities that you have decided to do, and then what are the kind of results you get out of those activities. So this is a classic model. Most companies, most management books will talk about. So let's relate that to how it works in our today's discussion. So before I go, I have a fourth question.
Yeah, sure. Rate quality of your data within CMMS in terms of accuracy, consistency, and completeness. All right. We have the polls here. 35% say they have poor data quality. 10% have very poor. 45% have good data quality, and 10% have very good data quality.
Okay, good. So more than 50% believe that they have a good data quality. So that's a good start. If you trust your data, then it becomes easier to build good KPIs and good reporting system or analysis system. For the people who don't have good data, or they believe that the data is suspect, that's where you can start some initiatives or KPIs to actually monitor the data quality itself. We have seen some organization as part of work order closure will create a step in the process, or one of the steps in the process is before actually you close out the work order, you would like to verify the quality of the data on your critical equipments and some random work orders, so that you ensure that people are entering good data. So so it's an ongoing process. There's a little bit of investment and maybe supervisor time, or so if you want to monitor good failure codes or monitor schedule compliance or monitor planning compliance, so some of the data elements need to be populated. So just to give you an example of the goal achievement model, you may have okay, just in this simple example is you want to have high reliability. So obviously reliability is a function of MTTR, MTBF, and So maybe those are considered as intermediate goals. And then for those, you may have some actions, how you want to improve the impact of some of these other factors that actually impact the MTTR. In this example, the skills of the employees, availability of employees will have a direct impact on the MTTR as an example. Or in case of MTBF, here it is talking only about PM, but you could have condition-based monitoring, you could have infrared or some other predictive maintenance type of initiative, which will in turn catch, or inspection program, which in turn will catch the failure at a much earlier time, and that way you can reduce the time between failures. So this is just one example. Similarly, another example, if you want to reduce unplanned work, okay, how does it impact? What are the intermediate goals? What are the leading indicators? In these examples, we are talking only 3 hierarchies, but in reality, in some cases, it could be multiple. So there is a balance between how complex you want to get and how detailed you want to get. So depending on the maturity of the organization, these levels may change. Some other example for strategic planning, of course, all these has effectiveness, efficiency, compliance. So you may group it, the KPIs, in those fashions also. So if you are making some new investments, you may have some KPIs related to some of those aspects also. So this is just another way of looking at how KPI can be put into different buckets. One to measure effectiveness, measure efficiency, and compliance, etc. So this is one another way some companies have used. Another example of maintenance, similar to the previous one. Here again, it is showing what the strategic KPIs are and how they are tied to the goals itself. And then at the operational level, at the shop floor level or at the field level, you may, so if I'm an electrician, what should be my KPIs and how it all relates to the overall goals of the maintenance department. Another example, this can be a little bit more on the balance scorecard type of thought process. So there are, in this case, of course, the financial aspect is measured, and then all the related KPIs for that, and then how those KPIs are in turn relate to the various function, whether it is internal processes, the service that you provide internal to your other departments, and or in some cases, if you are providing to outside to your other customers, internal or external, and then how well the organization is maturing, or how preparedness of organization, how it is improving. So the aspects of balance scorecard can actually be good ways, or good ways you can actually define your overall map of different KPIs and how it all relates to the overall business goals of the company. So there is a direct impact. So the whole today's discussion is actually overlapping with asset performance management and KPIs. So we wanted to link it with the business goals itself, whether it's financial or whether it's customer related or process improvement or organization preparedness, and how it all works together. So it may sound a little complex, but once you put that into a good picture, I think there is a links that you can build which will allow you to see how the overall process works. So all your KPIs in terms, somehow you got to link it with your strategies for plans and execution. You want to monitor reliability, financial, operational results. So those are your outcomes of all that. And overall, you want to drive performance at enterprise level. So you may start in a particular department or a particular site and then kind of gradually grow that into across the organization. So before I go, Rick, can I have the 5th question, please?
Sure. Rate your organization's ability to generate good KPIs using CMMS data. Very good, good, poor, or very poor. All right. 43% have poor ability to have good KPIs. 39% have good, 9% have very good, and 9% have very poor.
So again, I think it goes with the data quality also. It's a 50-50. So that's a sign of how maturity. We have seen it in other surveys also. As your data quality improves, your ability to generate good KPIs also improves. But let's look at what goes into defining these KPIs. Obviously, we want to know what is being measured, how it is being defined. So when we talk about, and we'll share some examples, the details of a particular KPI, what goes into that. But then what frequency do you do it? What are the tolerances? If there is a little bit of data quality issue, what the tolerance level is? And then in some cases, you also want to look at, how quickly the organization is going to respond, or the individual is going to respond who is being monitored, or who is as a team being monitored. And then most of these KPIs have to be policy sensitive. Whatever the policy, whether it's safety related policy, or in case of reliability, or whatever overall goals, policies that have been defined, how sensitive they are. We talked about the ability to communicate with the help of KPIs. So in that way, various people who are affected directly or indirectly kind of relate to that. Then in some cases, we got to determine whether that KPI is feasible to generate. If we are not going to, like in case of MTBF, it could be very difficult if the correct data is not taken into account. So many a times, a CMMS system may not actually record the time the asset went down. It may be part of your SCADA system, or a PI system, or some other production management system, or some other system, instrument system, where that data. So depending on your data sources, the way you capture data, you got to measure. You got to look at the feasibility of measure, whether you can do that measurement, and then how predictable, whether it is really reflecting the purpose for which you are trying to measure it. Some other aspects. Some can be qualitative or quantitative, depending on, it's a little bit of a combination. Not everything can be put into quantitative terms. So in some cases, if it is a qualitative, then maybe some other tools need to be used to measure the outcome. So if I'm going to provide a good service, how do you define a service? Is it that feeling, or is it the actual number of hours that you were able to deliver the service? So there are many aspects in which you may have to differentiate. Then you got to balance between what is realistic, what is feasible. Then obviously you got to have a good data. Then you got to have a good set of measures too. You cannot have too many of them, as well as you cannot have too less either. And many a time, just focusing on a cost may not be the best approach. Cost in many cases can be a lagging indicator. So there has to be a good balance between the benefits and the investments that you make. And of course, these have to be consistent. So if you're going to trend it over a period of time, you cannot calculate in one way for a certain period and then change the calculation. So it may not be useful. So the definition needs to be fairly consistent so you can see the trends. Some KPIs can be short-term, some can be long-term, depending on if you have a very tactical or objective which you are trying to tackle for that particular time period, then maybe that's the way that KPI is designed. If something is long-term, 3-year, 5-year period, then it has a different purpose. So that's also important to know between strategic as well as tactical. So most of the tactical will be short-term and most of the strategic will be a long-term. So as we discussed, some are leading, lagging, qualitative, quantitative, internal, external, process versus outcome. So so there are different ways to look at it. Some could be just for planning purposes and some could be just for control purposes. So this kind of puts the KPI into different perspectives. So it's not just a single number you try to work with. So there is some surrounding thought process that have to be put in place so that you kind of understand how you're going to use the information that is provided by the KPI. Some basic guidelines: set clear targets linked to the overall corporate goals or your department goals or your whatever the group that is trying to implement or trying to monitor. Measure the gaps for improvements, because ultimately the whole objective of monitoring the KPIs is to really identify areas of improvement, and that should be built in as much as possible, or have a correct related KPIs. So if our whole goal is to do, let's say as an example, planning compliance by at 90% level or schedule compliance by 90% level. So maybe the other related KPIs maybe which will determine for example the total work hours required versus available hours. So whether that has any direct impact or not. So sometimes those type of other related information and other related KPIs can be very useful. Obviously the KPIs have to be comprehensive, consistent, and easy to understand, and this goes with that communication aspect which becomes then a norm in the organization and kind of become a well acceptable fact. Many times we have seen having too many KPIs also can be a challenging. So we have seen, as far as execution is concerned or monitoring the activities or behavior is concerned, it's good to have about 5 or 6. This is not a magic number. It could be more or less, but this is typically we have seen more effective. And then the selection of those 6 KPIs more or less should have direct impact on the should be linked directly to the leading, and then of course the outcome is also related to that. So this is where choosing right KPIs can be very useful. So when you are assessing the performance of your subordinates or overall your department or the site or the company, those things need to be put in perspective. Some of these KPIs need to be set in such a way that you engage the workforce. They kind of know all the activities that they perform on a day-to-day basis are somehow linked to those KPIs. So if I'm going to monitor some, let's say, schedule compliance, then the KPIs and all the activities that an individual is going to do, he got to feel that all that is towards the compliance of that KPI. If they are engaged in some other activities and not related to that KPI, then it may not be as useful. So there may be primary KPIs and maybe secondary KPIs as well, so depending on how the organization is set. And most cases this is used for identifying areas of improvement, deficiencies, and also this can be used to applaud the things that people are doing right, or whether at the organization level or at the individual level. And really this can be used as a good tool to recognize the contribution made by the individual or the group or the department, or in some cases the whole site or the the other thing we have seen is some KPIs are designed in such a way they are impacting or trying to find the bad actors. So it's in a way, in a large organization, micromanagement is not feasible or may not be advisable. So in that case, the ownership is at the individual level, but you're also trying to influence the behavior of the group of people, or trying to get everybody on the same page. So indirectly, you're doing a little bit of micromanagement, but it's with that overall objective that, to improve the performance. So some KPIs can be really designed to do catch-all net. Here, the whole purpose, some of those KPIs, is really to find problems, something that falls through the cracks, and you want to somewhere catch that. And so they may not be on a day-to-day. You may not measure them, but you might measure it every quarter or every 6 months and see some of those type of bad actors or outliers that you can catch. When you set the performance targets, obviously they have to be realistic, and that's one of the things. Many a times you may have some stretched goals, so they are achievable but yet challenging. So it's not too far off. So if you set some goals which are unrealistic, 30% improvement, 40% improvement, yeah, it is possible in some cases, but not in all cases. So in such a situation, it's good to be pragmatic, good to be practical, and try to set the targets. In some cases, people define good KPIs, but the targets may be off or may not be realistic. So the overall effectiveness may not be there, or may discourage, or may kind of communicate that this is something we cannot do. Or so it's very important to set good targets for any KPIs. And as in most cases, the objective is to improve. So you got to give that encouragement and applaud, and then kind of stretch it further. And in case of reliability, or let's say proactive maintenance work, maybe today you are doing 40%, 50%, but incrementally every quarter you can keep on increasing. But on the day one itself, you cannot just jump by 50% or 80%. So it's very important to set right targets. Overall, the approach that one can take, it can be a very big deal in some organization, depending on their maturity, preparedness, leadership, all the other things that we talked about. Is how do I build, or how do we, which are focused on reliability and maintenance, as an example. So in this case, you take the highest priority, or something that may be a low-hanging fruit, or it could be something that is that is part of the current initiatives, and then see how that relate to the business goals, prioritize them, maybe start with 2-3 subject area, and then continue to tackle other subject. If you are going to focus on reliability failure analysis, or PM compliance, or planning scheduling, maybe you take up 1 area or 2 area, and in reality that each one of those areas may relate to another area, but sometimes it's kind of hard to drive everybody at the same time. So we have seen this is more effective. So you may have a 6-8 months kind of projects which will allow you to keep implementing additional or KPIs in newer areas. And in some cases, for the same area, you can start building further KPIs. So also it is very important that along with the KPI, you also want to have related information. So if my planning compliance is only 80%, so what other information do I need to understand the problem behind that 80%. So maybe we have too many emergency work orders. Maybe we don't have good supply chain and spare parts are not coming on time, there is too many delays, contracting services are not performing as per their commitment, or so some other related information is good to have, because that will complete the cycle of analysis and it will help identify a problem and take corrective actions in timely manner. And then of course when you actually implement such things, you got to have assess the quality of the data, refine it, and ensure that this is a sustainable model. So if you calculate it today and you want to do it for the next 12 months, you have a way to do that. So if you do it in Excel, that's one way, but that may not be sustainable model to compute it on a manual basis. So you got to figure out a way that you can automate that to whatever degree possible. And then once you do that, roll it out, explain what it means, and then we have also seen some companies put it out on the notice boards or the bulletin boards, or in some cases monitors in the cafeteria and the shop floor, and broadcast that. So more maintenance boards type of application can help disseminate that type of information at the plant level, at the shop floor level. And once you finish one subject matter, you can go to the next one. And this is another way, one can actually build a process around that, and this is an iterative process. So as you do it from one site, one department to another, you can actually continue to build the additional KPIs. So these are some of the examples. Like in this case, economic key indicators, which KPI is related to maintenance, but it's related to cost, finance, budget, or in terms cases, if you're trying to monitor production hours, maybe your operating hours, you can define like this. As in case of some balance scorecard, if you're trying to see the organizational preparedness or maturity, or how organization is evolving, maybe you can design something to understand that. Some of these examples of lagging indicators versus leading indicators, I think I made a mistake. So we can actually look at the impact of the leading indicators on the lagging indicators. This is another example where these were just 4 objectives that in this particular case this organization had. So in their asset value realization, these were the KPIs that they were. So they had one group of KPIs related to increasing throughput productivity, which again, in turn can actually relate to unplanned downtime, capacity utilization. Now obviously capacity utilization has other pieces which is beyond maintenance department, but nevertheless maintenance department also plays some role in the utilization as well. So proactive maintenance, PM compliance, predictive maintenance. So these were the 5 KPIs were really they felt has a direct impact on the productivity. Now these can be treated as a lagging indicator in some cases. So there will be associated leading indicators that will probably determine all the activities that each one of the maintenance personnel are involved with. In case of cost, maybe some of these things are also considered, which has a direct impact. And again, if leading and lagging indicators can be studied and can be put in place. So these are some of the examples how companies have kind of streamlined or shortlisted the KPIs that they would like to focus on. Some more examples, and then obviously this is just an example where companies would like to compare with their peers in the industry or people in the similar business. So in this case, there was specific goal, and then they came up with strategic operational perspective, had some goals, strategic KPIs, operational KPIs. So this is the way they differentiated. So most of these strategic will be lagging indicators, and the operational will be, in most cases, will be leading indicators. And so this could be done at a department level, at a functional level, or so you can actually divide based on how you think you can best manage it. So some of the examples here you can have, once you define it, you can actually put it into a dashboard like this. Again, this is an example where one can actually look at different KPIs and look at how they are defined. So let me see how this works. Okay. There are some other examples where you can actually look at different KPIs, look at, and these are some of the tools that are available. Here somebody is monitoring the cost, and it's a little bit, they can go and see how different types of elements that go into the cost. And some of these tools will allow you to actually visualize the data a lot more effectively. In the last 3-5 years, most of the tools have become a lot more helpful in terms of visualizing the data. So these are some of the examples of how you can set up the different targets. So here, in this case, some targets were set which were considered green, the typical green, yellow, red. So depending on your particular style, you can actually look at different ways of presenting this data. Some other examples, when you actually define a KPI, this is an example where a formal process was, they went through a formal process to define the KPI. So across the organization, they can actually communicate. So of course, what the KPI is, who's going to use it, what's the business purpose of it, what should be the goals, and these goals will change over a period of time, and how they're going to benchmark against other companies or other sites in this case. And then this type of documentation also allows, so because you might put up KPI in practice, and then after 6 months people will forget what was the business logic or how it is actually computed. So it kind of provides a way to understand or communicate how the KPI itself is built, some assumptions that will go with it, some cases, what is included, what is not included. So for example, here this is a planning work schedule compliance related KPI. So maybe you don't include all the canceled work orders as an example. If the spares are not available, then maybe that's not a problem of scheduling, maybe it's a planning problem as an example. So what is included, what is excluded, how it is actually calculated. The devil is in the details as in some cases. So the actual calculation, the definition is also important. And then in the end, you of course want to give a guidance on how you can interpret this KPI. What does it mean to their day-to-day work, or how does it mean to, what are the changes that they have to make. So interpretation, so some sort of guidance is always good to have. In some cases, as we discussed, some could be lagging and leading. And then sometimes the KPI itself can be derived from other KPIs. And knowing that related KPIs is also good to know, because if you're investigating a problem, it will allow you to see what else needs to be seen along with that. frequency of usage. Maybe you have it weekly, monthly, however you think is important. And then, of course, the KPIs can be sliced and diced by different dimensions, location, supervisor, priority, depending on how you are collecting the data. And having such a formal document can be very, very useful to ensure that you communicate what that KPIs is. So there are many other examples, but in the interest of time, I will show some other some KPIs and then related the trending of those KPIs, how people like to see. Some of this may sound like a simple graph, and maybe calculated as a normal report, but it also shows how the KPI is presented in a different way. In this case, it is showing what the production is, but it is also showing the availability of the asset. So whether it has a direct impact on the production or not, and if so, why the availability was poor, as an example. Quality or EHS incidents, all these has a direct impact on the asset health and the asset, the way the assets are maintained, the cost component. So maybe you, depending on how you want to set, you may create a dashboard like this. This may look very busy, has different 8 or 9 different KPIs are trended. This is another example where in this area they are trying to look at all the reliability related initiatives and performance. So availability of the asset, downtime, schedule compliance, MTBF, etc. And here this is more on the management side, whatever the actions that you take. Also they were trying to measure the PM effectiveness as an example, and here there is a cost, budget, material. So a presentation like this can kind of give you a big picture. So maybe you're not doing well in certain areas in this case. You can get attention from the right people. Some other examples, this is more kind of a lot of KPIs are listed, so they just kind of made a presentation like this. May not look as useful, but it has really a lot of KPIs. So some companies like that, and they can see everything together. So the presentation style may vary, but again, it is really what the tools you use, how you use, what kind of level of sophistication you have with your end users, and how complex you want to make. Not all of these reports may be useful for everybody involved. Maybe you will have a view that is just set for certain group of people in different ways. So I think I'm running out of time. So maybe Rick, we can open it up for questions. We have about 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure. I request all the attendees to post their questions. Already, Sunil, we have a couple of questions. I'll just take the first one. How do we go about process for building meaningful KPIs in our environment?
I think that's an interesting question. I think at some point in time, probably, I think I discussed in my earlier conversation that one has to see how well prepared you are. Maybe you start with what your immediate goals are, maybe focused on what the outcome you want to have, and maybe that's the how you're going to measure that outcome-wise. Maybe that's one good start. And then whatever the actions that you are going to take to achieve that outcome. So are you going to, and how you can measure those actions. So for example, if you're trying to do PM compliance for 80%, 90% PM compliance, maybe that's what one of the KPI you will have is to measure PM compliance. But you also want to see, whether the schedule compliance is good, or you will also like to see availability of resources and what's the ratio of the work involved versus available hours. So the good start is probably take one area and focus on that area and see the outcome and all the activities that you can perform. to improve those goals. So, and a lot of times, maybe before you embark on such a project, look at what your current level of output is or the results are, and so that if you're going to monitor it, then and improve upon it or take an initiative to improve upon it, then you can do that. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, sure. There are a lot many questions. I'll just pick some of them. How do we prioritize the KPIs? We have too many KPIs defined.
That's art and science. I think it all depends on your particular objective. There could be some tactical short-term objective and could be a long-term objective. So most cases, if you are in a situation where you have some set short-term, then maybe that's all you focus on. But most of the time, these short-term goals should also be linked indirectly with the long-term objective. So it's a tough question, but I think there is a argument to be made to have limited amount of KPIs to be monitored. So I would advise in that case is to maybe pick some short-term goals and hope and monitor them, and then ensure that those short-term goals are linked with the long-term objectives.
All right. There's one question, Sunil. Based on international standards, please advise PM versus CM ratio.
Actually, in most, there is no international standard per se. I think what has evolved in the last 12 to 15 years is there is a lot of, and the PM is kind of if you do preventive maintenance, the definition as PM is one thing, but if you do proactive maintenance, which includes PM and all the PDM and all these other initiatives that you might have, we have seen that is growing in good companies, mature companies, reaching up to 90–95%. And in certain industries, it is much higher. So if you are a nuclear power plant or a life sciences company or something like that, they may have a very high goal for itself. But if you are maybe in some other industry, maybe you will be 70%, and then you might be fine even with the 70%. So it really, there are a lot of studies being done in that area, and there is ISO 55. There's a new initiative which is going to define some of these things. But I don't have a clear answer on that.
Okay. There are a lot many questions, Sunil. I'll quickly take one more. Which indicators will help me monitor reliability?
There are many. Like in this example, just a basic indicators like availability, downtime, scheduled downtime, total downtime, MTBF. I think those will directly, those are in most cases are lagging indicators. And then there is a related, I would call it as leading or the action indicators, which is more to do with your schedule compliance, PM compliance, PDM compliance, your time to repair. Some of those things will have a direct impact on the reliability itself.
Thanks, Sunil. There are a lot many questions. We will thank you, attendees. We will answer your queries through mails. You can keep on sharing your questions with us. And thank you very much, Sunil.
Hey, thank you all. Thank you all for attending, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.